The year is 2007. The Raconteurs touring cycle behind their debut album, Broken Boy Soldiers, is complete, and it's time for the White Stripes to return to the studio. Announcements are soon made that the new album is a return to form for the band, some suggesting a back-to-basics approach to creating music. While Get Behind Me Satan wasn't my favorite, I always respected it. But to be honest, I was ready for a guitar-heavy, melodic White Stripes album like their previous releases. When this song finally hits the radio, you were greeted with a wall of big guitar. This is what I wanted, right? I think so. The song was all over the place. It was chaotic, political, it was tight and heavy. It really defined the style that was incorporated throughout Jack White's solo career that was 5 years down the road. The song was so recent, the official music video was released on YouTube. No longer did you need to sit through hours of music videos on Much Music to see them on your TV. Their final album was released in the age of social media, forever feeling like the new record. And that new record stayed close to my heart for nearly 2 decades. This is the hardest podcast to podcast, and that song is Icky Thump.
I'd like to introduce to you a band that you know and love. Come to you like the sound of equipment being thrown from a moving van, the sound of dead cell phones and oil rigs, the sound of empty parking lots and school buses. They love to live and live to love. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesus Children of America, the White Stripes.
Hello, come on in. Water's great. My name is Ryan Schaap, and this is the hardest podcast to podcast. I was very excited to have the conversation you are going to hear shortly. If you are somebody that grew up with Canadian radio, or you like music podcasts, Alan Cross has been a fixture. He is a pillar of music broadcasting, of music journalism, and just a fascinating individual. I can't tell you how impactful his radio program was on me growing up. It's called The Ongoing History of New Music. I would listen to it about 10 or 11 o'clock at night on CFox, 99.3 The Fox here in Vancouver. It's a show that molded my taste in music. It is a program that taught me so much about the progression of music through history, teaches you so much about punk, so much about new wave, and the impact that all of them had on so many artists and still do. I cannot recommend this show enough. If you're listening in Canada, go find it on your FM dial. You can subscribe to his podcast. I do. I listen every week, and he's just continuing to do an amazing job telling the story, telling the history, the ongoing history of new music. If you like what we're doing here and you want to support the show, you can head on over to buymeacoffee.com/hardestpodtopod. Buymeacoffee.com/hardestpodtopod. Bit of a polarizing response to last week's episode with Brian Quimby. I got to tell you, I loved the conversation. I was looking forward to it for weeks. Brian is hands down one of my favorite podcasters. Just a unique individual with such an intriguing outlook. And I loved the conversation. Did I agree with everything he said? Not necessarily, but it was interesting to hear those takes. You know, a lot of people wrote in, a lot of people left comments, and I was pretty clear to them that, you know, I want every episode to be unique and different from the last. I want to hear somebody's perspective on the band or the era or that song that isn't exactly like mine. I thought I had that and then some last week with Brian. While the overall goal of this show is to celebrate their entire catalog, I find myself wanting to judge their art through my eyes, my 2025 eyes, my 37-year-old eyes. Not through the rose-colored glasses I wore as a teenager and well into my 20s. I'll be the first to say that the White Stripes are my favorite band of all time. Jack White is more than likely my favorite artist of all time as well. I will be the first to be critical about a song or an album or a comment or what have you. The majority of these podcasts are going to be overwhelmingly positive, but there will be some episodes that make you react to something or you'll hear an opinion different than yours. Take those critical episodes as they come and just remember in the back of your mind that we are here to do this band justice, to celebrate their incredible catalog and champion what amazing performers they were. And that's the end goal of this. And that's what we're going to do. I kind of had a realization when I was responding to a lot of listeners about last week's episode. And it kind of dawned on me that this is selfishly, as much as it is a podcast devoted to the White Stripes, this is a podcast about me, about my upbringing, my experiences with this music and with this band. Growing up, I only really had one White Stripes friend, and that was my good friend Chris. So I never really, I always kept my fandom and my appreciation for this band almost close to the vest. Like this is my thing, and I selfishly didn't really want to share it with anybody. And here I am in my mid to late 30s wanting to share this with people. And I want to have these conversations. And I want to have the conversations and the experiences that I put off, keeping that fandom close to the vest. I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed every single episode and every single interview on this show. Here's a quick Jack White update. As you know, the goal of this podcast is to create a big enough footprint and make enough noise that we get Jack White himself on this show, not once, but 3 times, to discuss 3 mystery songs. I know what they are. Literally nobody else does. So that's what our whole goal of this show is. So through the process of elimination, you can start to wonder, hey, maybe it's this song, maybe it's that song. As for progress getting him on the show, there is none. I also impulsively, with our shared credit card, my wife and I bought a print from Third Man Photo Studios of Jack White, the first Vancouver show on the No Name tour, and I have to build up the confidence to email Third Man and say, hi, this is not the best print and it's really dark and I paid $68 Canadian for it and $23 in duty. Could you do anything about this? I don't want to do it, but I have to build up the courage to do it. It's pretty dark. It's a great photo, but it's just dark. For that price, hey, maybe you can help me out. Also, with the exception of the Union Forever, this is one of 2 political songs that the White Stripes have. They've got the Big 3 Killed My Baby, and they've got Icky Thump, which talks about immigration and the whole mindset of who's using who. Hey, America, you got nothing better to do. Why don't you kick yourself out? You're an immigrant too. This conversation was recorded before all of the protests and all of the insane National Guard response in Los Angeles. What the U.S. government and what ICE is doing is horrible. It's atrocious. And they're not doing this for any good. And it's only doing terrible things to the United States. But this is an important song in the White Stripes catalog. And at this point in history, what we are seeing south of the border in the United States, I think it's an important song. It's now time for this week's call to action. I want you to hit pause here, go to your streaming platform of choice, and listen to the title track, track 1 off of Icky Thump album. You hit pause right now. I'll wait here and respond to some more emails about the Brian episode. Okay, Icky Thump is fresh in our brain. Maybe go watch the video too. But it's now time for my conversation with the one, the only, Mr. Alan Cross. Our guest this week is a pillar of Canadian rock radio and broadcasting, the creator and host of the incredible long-standing program, The Ongoing History of New Music. He is also the host of Uncharted, Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry, and he might just be speaking in a town near you. This is Alan Cross. Alan, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well.
Excellent to hear. Before we talk about the White Stripes in depth for the next little while, I just would like to say that I'm somebody that grew up listening to The Ongoing History of New Music. It shaped my taste in music. It prevented me from going down the old butt rock route, and I'm core memories of listening to you discuss How Soon Is Now by the Smiths at like 11 o'clock at night in the dark, listening on CFOX. So it is a pleasure to chat with you today.
Oh, well, thank you.
We are we're discussing a song off of the White Stripes' last album, Icky Thump, the title track. But the White Stripes famously blew up in the UK when John Peel made Hello Operator, I believe, his song of the week, or kind of gave it the light, when they were still quite underground in the United States. When were the White Stripes on your radar?
Around the same time, and that's because I was in London. I just happened to be visiting the Rough Trade record store in Notting Hill, and there's a guy there, or at least he was there, a guy named Nigel, behind the counter, and I went up to him and I said, what do you got? What's new? What's hot here? And he says, well, mate, you might be surprised. There's this group from Detroit that we really like over here that you may not have heard of yet, and they're called the White Stripes. Kind of weird. They're a brother and sister, husband and wife something team. And there's only two of them. He plays guitar and sings, and she sort of bangs on the drums. I think you might like it. And I can't remember what he gave me, but it was, I think it was a CD single or maybe an EP that Rough Trade had released early in the career. So this would be, 99, 2000.
Oh man, so that's very early on in this. And what was your first takeaway? You've got a pretty simplistic review from this clearly trusted source at Rough Trade. It's guitar and drums and quite loud. You put it on, and what do you get from it?
Well, this was when the indie rock revival was just beginning to happen, and it was a mostly New York thing with the Strokes and Interpol and Yeah Yeah Yeahs and TV on the Radio and a few others. But we also had bands like the Hives coming out of Sweden, and we had the White Stripes coming out of Detroit. Now, if you were around then, you were kind of concerned. Late 90s, very late 90s, early 2000s. You were very kind of concerned about the state of rock, especially alternative rock. It had run out of steam about 1996 after grunge and alternative sort of, the audience aged out and everybody started dying. And pop music was on the ascendant with Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and so on. And all we were left with was a whole bunch of late 90s one-hit wonders and nu metal, which was extremely polarizing. So there was a real concern that rock was on its last legs. But then these scruffy bands from New York and Sweden and Detroit came along, and it was like, okay, well, this is new, this is different, this is almost, and you have to be fairly old to do this, to say this, it was almost like what we heard out of New Wave and punk in about 77, 78. It was like, okay, this is different. It's a bit weird. It's not offensive. It's not bad. It's just different. And the more you listen to it, the more you realize that this was, in fact, pretty darn cool. Now, two-piece bands were still a rarity around that time. The earliest two-piece band that I know of was a band from Kingston called the Inbreds. And then we had Local H out of Chicago. And other than that, you had to have at least three people in a band. But here we have a two-piece band, and the drummer is a woman, which was admittedly quite rare still at that time. And then the guy out front was obviously a fan of old school blues, but had decided that he was going to update that sound. He wailed on his guitar, and he sang like a banshee, and the drummer just pounded away, and that was her role. So it was different. It was fresh. It was interesting from an aesthetic point of view, because you look at the album covers, you look at how they dressed and how they presented themselves. It was all pretty cool. And the question was, okay, with these first indie albums, are they going to have any sort of staying power? Well, and the obvious answer was yes. Yes, in fact, they did have staying power. And with each album, up to album number 6, which I guess was their last one, they were, they became a formidable force in rock music, especially Jack.
In that journey from the self-titled album in '99 through to Style, through White Blood Cells, into Elephant and Get Behind Me, Satan, they were a band that they were artists that took a lot of, I don't want to say risks, but they were always really pushing themselves. The band was all about limitations, and the box that Jack confined him in. And it seemingly was their recipe for success. It also really burnt out the band. Touring was so exhausting. There was only 2 of them. There were so many responsibilities on them. By this point in 2006, they take a breather after a difficult album to record and Get Behind Me, Satan. The problems and challenges recording that album are well documented. Jack goes off to do the Raconteurs, his super group, if you will, with Benson and the rhythm section from the Greenhorns, and then it's time to do another White Stripes album. But at the time, V2 Records goes out of business, so they're shopping around for major labels, which is kind of a first for them. In kind of going back, I was 18, 19 at the time. You kind of have rose-colored glasses on. Going back, kind of, rereading these interviews and kind of focusing on what the band was like, it kind of felt like they had started to get comfortable. They had kind of gone back to basics, if you will, and everything kind of became about guitars. And I don't think that it was about how can we be as commercially successful, but it was, hey, we got something that we know it works. Why don't we just give that a try? Go ahead.
Probably. Jack was always, continues to be, a very restless sort of soul. He is always looking to do something different. He is always looking to grow. All you have to do is listen to the development of his guitar sound and guitar tones through those 6 albums, and they go all over the place. It's just incredible what he does. He, I think, wanted to try things outside the very confining space of a 2-piece band, where he could be free to do other things as a frontman, as a guitarist, as a producer, with a proper, that's a terrible way to put it, but with a full backup band. The Raconteurs was the first attempt at doing this, and it worked out pretty well. And then, Dead Weather and some of the other things that he did after that. So I think the White Stripes ended at exactly the right time, because most bands have a lifespan of about 7 years. You get together, you learn to play your instruments, you have a little bit of success, you're young, you're angry, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you get better, you get a bigger fan base, the dynamics within the band change, you grow older, grow more mature, you become a better player, and so on. And I think by 2006, 2007, the White Stripes had pretty much taken that formula as far as they possibly could, which is about 7-8 years after they began. So right on schedule. The other thing was that Meg is a tremendous introvert. We almost never heard her talk. The funniest 4 words in the English language are Meg White solo album. And she wanted, their personal relationship had broken up. They had gone on to new relationships, and Meg just wanted to disappear. She just wanted to, raise a family. And you can see how much we've actually heard from her ever since. As far as I know, the 2 of them still keep in touch and they're friends. But I don't think we're ever going to hear from Meg White ever again.
Do you think she'll make an appearance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Oh, I think that'll happen. I definitely do think that'll happen. But and that may be the only time we ever hear her speak. But there's no guarantee.
Yeah. If she will say a few very soft words in the microphone if she appears, and quite frankly, that's enough. This is somebody that is a very shy, introverted person that respects or that really appreciates her privacy, and I feel like the majority of the fan base really, respects that for her. So
I think so. I mean, they've never gone after her. They've left her alone. I'm not even sure where she's living. I thought it was Nashville, somewhere in the U.S. South, I think. But we have heard absolutely nothing about her for at least 15 years.
Yeah, I've seen one photo. Somebody ran into her somewhere in a bar and took a photo, and that was the extent of it. And yeah, after with following the final performance with Late Night with Conan O'Brien, it's been nothing. And hey, I think a lot of people would kill to have that type of lack of online footprint, to be honest. I bring up I brought up comfortable, but I'm going back and I'm reading a few articles. I read a good interview in Blender from this time, and it kind of paints the picture of the White Stripes have matured. They've got, they're famous now. They're being interviewed in fancy posh hotels. They're kind of doing what they want, and it was probably the first kind of instance I got of a bit of a jaded Jack White, where, like, he says in this interview, I've come to the conclusion that the limitations we've inflicted on ourselves mean nothing to 95% of the people who hear our music. And I was like, well, you're right, but that's kind of what was so special and so unique about this group. And then they come in and say, Icky Thump is probably my favorite album. I wouldn't say it's their best. I think it's my one I enjoy the most. But they kind of come in and they say, we're going back to basics. And I always feel like that is not a death blow for a band, but it's like, okay, the evolution's kind of hit the ceiling, and we've got, this is kind of this is the form going on from here.
Well, I think what happens is, all right, we've drifted away. And again, that sounds negative, but I don't mean it to be. They drifted away from what they started out as, which is completely normal. Again, you learn how to play your instruments, you become better songwriters, better performers, better lyricists, all that sort of stuff. And then, you maybe run out of steam. Like, where do we go from here? Well, one of the best ways to do it, and U2 has done it several times, is you burn it all down and you begin again. David Bowie did that a number of times. And it's a new way to, start from scratch, reevaluate what you've done, what you've become, and where you've gone. And it's like, okay, if we were to do it all over again, knowing what we know now, where might we end up? So it's actually a good creative exercise.
I feel like, and the burn it down, the burn it all down approach, I don't think it would have been sustainable based on the parties involved. You had, somebody, in a character like Meg White, a performer like Meg White, and kind of a personality like Meg White. I don't know if she would, want to do that, or if, based on where you want to take your music and your fame, if she would want to be along for that ride. So burning it down for me really felt like the Blunderbuss solo album, where he's coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And, if we want to look at it another way, and this is going to sound cruel, but it doesn't mean to be. I think over the course of the White Stripes' career, Jack evolved much more radically as a musician than Meg did. Now, part of that is that he's a guitarist and a singer, and she's a drummer. And frankly, there's only so much you can do as a drummer. And I speak as a drummer myself. We keep the rhythm, we keep the beat, we're the heartbeat. We don't experiment with sounds and textures and approaches. The best we can do is come up with a new arrangement for our kit and maybe learn how to play some new time signatures.
Now imagine, Alan, if you're in a band where somebody says, I love the way it sounds, like the way you are playing, because it sounds like you have just picked up sticks for the first time. Don't practice. don't get better, don't evolve. So immediately she is in this type of extremely limited role, which is everything about the White Stripes, and almost like, yeah, obviously this is Jack's vehicle, but he's kind of saying, well, don't, just stay where you are. And I would find that extremely challenging as a musician or a creative person in any way. And it's no knock against Jack, because that's the sound that made it special. So when she would kind of play something a little more complex, like even on the song Icky Thump, where we're going to talk about shortly, like as years go by, like it was far less kid banging on pots and pans, and then it evolved into, well, these are some pretty solid and concurrent, like just solid and catchy and unique drum beats.
No, I agree. But she was limited in what she could do because she was told what to do. I mean, when they first got together, she didn't know how to play anything. I mean, they had their first date. They went back to the house. Jack had some drums set up upstairs because he had been playing drums, and she just began bashing on those drums. And he thought, well, this is kind of cool. And that she was in a box, and it was a box that was essential to the White Stripes sound. And if she had turned into Neil Peart, it just wouldn't have been the White Stripes anymore.
No.
If Jack wanted to do that, he would have to go and form a brand new band with completely new players and a new headspace and a new attitude. And that's exactly what happened.
I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about the song Icky Thump. Where are you working in 2007? Are you in Toronto on the Edge?
Yeah, I'm the program director at 102.1 The Edge. And of course, White Stripes were what we would have called a core artist back then, meaning that whenever they put out a new record, we would certainly play it immediately, and we continued to play all their old songs as well. Icky Thump comes along, and it's like, hey, it's more White Stripes. Oh, some more interesting guitar sounds. Oh, more bashing on drums from Meg. And we are definitely going to support the band. And I think it was around this time, and I'm pretty sure it was, that they went on the Northern Lights tour.
That's correct.
And they would drop into unusual places in the middle of the day to play an impromptu set. And it was around this time, I'm pretty sure it was around this time, that they came through Toronto on that tour, and they decided that they were going to play a 12:30 in the afternoon set at a daycare at a YMCA in downtown Toronto.
That's right.
And when we heard that, we all it was not too far away from the radio station. So we all ran up the street, and we were there. We saw them play, and I can't remember what they played, but it wasn't. I'm pretty sure that there were no hits. I'm pretty sure
it was Wheels on the Bus.
They did play Wheels on the Bus.
A child took over vocals. I've seen that before.
Yeah, that's right. They did that, and that was the hit. But otherwise, it was all obscure stuff. But still, I mean, to see them playing in a YMCA daycare in the middle of the day was really, really cool. And that, again, was part of Jack's vision, where we're going to do things differently. We are not going to be the typical rock band. And there's only the two of us, and we've got a small crew, and we can afford to do these sort of goofy things. So, good for them.
In Vancouver, they played in Burnaby and Deer Lake Park, and I was probably in line for 5-6 hours beforehand, and then it kind of word trickled down, because as we date ourselves, this is before cell phones, and you learned about this before texting. I don't know, it is texting before smartphones. You go home later and you realize, like, oh, the White Stripes played at a community center in Burnaby, and they had all their old gear from like their first few tours, and they didn't tell anybody, and it built and built and built, and it was probably one of the coolest things they did. But the absolute scope of the Great White Northern Lights tour was, you're playing every province and every territory, and as great as it is to play everywhere in Canada, the biggest city from Vancouver is 8.5 hour drive if you really floor it. So they're going up to the Yukon, so like it absolutely was a taxing tour, and playing twice a day or playing 2 shows on show day and traveling, and just like it was already hard enough for a 2-person band. I remember reading recently about Jack White saying how difficult it was to play the song My Doorbell with just the two of them. And now you have all of this stuff, all of these commitments. Oh, and you've got the shyest introvert in the world playing drums along for the ride. Like, yeah, I would say that it, as amazing as the Canadian tour was, and it was, that, it burnt him out pretty damn quickly. But it
Well, you got to also wonder if this was the plan. If Jack is the kind of guy who looks down the road, and I'm wondering if he had envisioned this tour as sort of a goodbye for the band as well. So let's do all these things while we can, and then knowing full well that once it's all over or shortly after it's over, we're just going to pull the plug.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, let's tour every province and territory in Canada. Let's somehow headline Madison Square Garden. Let's do a tour of the South to really embrace our blues roots, and then a neat and tidy run up the West Coast, and we call it a day. It's the perfect swan song, in my opinion. So you're working at the radio station. Get Behind Me, Satan is kind of all over the map. It is a keyboard and piano heavy album. Icky Thump comes out, the first single, the title track, loud and bombastic, big guitars. What are you thinking about this? Like, what's your first kind of thoughts on this song?
Okay. Honest to God, my first thought was, oh, this is an homage to an old British comedy series called The Goodies. Because I remember watching this. The Goodies were kind of like a PG version, like a cross between Monty Python and Benny Hill. And they did a series of skits. And there was this one skit called Icky Thump. Not Icky, but Icky Thump. And it was about a lost martial art that involved braining somebody with a blood pudding. And if you can find it online, and it was funnier back in the day than it is today. But this particular skit's claim to fame was that a man in the UK was watching this skit and laughed so hard that he died of a heart attack. And this is what I remember. I thought, Icky Thump, oh, it's The Goodies from 1973. And it turns out that I was right, because at that time, Jack was either dating or married to Karen Ellison, and she was well aware of The Goodies because of her background. And she used the term Icky Thump because Icky and Thump are both euphemisms for hell.
Okay.
And, Jack is like, well, what's this? And she explained the background of that phrase. And I'm assuming The Goodies skit. And he thought, okay, well, I like the sound of that, but I'm going to turn it into something that has nothing to do with blood pudding and is not very funny at all.
Yeah, we're turning this song that we're taking a phrase that was involved in the death of a man from death by humor, and we're turning it into probably the first and only really politically charged White Stripes song.
It was at least overtly, because if you look at the lyrics and the way he talks about immigrants, and then if you look at the video, which looks like Jack doing a reverse immigration thing, sneaking over the border into Mexico, and then being exploited or facing exploitation like an immigrant coming into the United States would face. I would say you're right.
Yeah. And absolutely, it's a heavy song. It's loud. It's a little chaotic. It's not one that's going to have you can't really, bob your head to the beat too long, because it kind of stops and starts and goes all over. And there's this sort of frantic keyboard like solo. And it's a bit of a chaotic song, but it a lot of the White Stripes, songs were quite chaotic, and it almost felt like it felt like a hit. It felt like a timeless White Stripes song almost pretty quickly after it was released, and people really wanted to hear that big Jack White guitar again, and that's what they gave him.
Yeah, but at this point, Jack is really deep into guitar technology. And around the time this album came out, he, of course, was in that movie with Jimmy Page and The Edge called It Might Get Loud, where that opens with him making a guitar with a piece of 2x4. And he was becoming something of a guitar hero, simply because he was in many ways like Eddie Van Halen, in that he had this idea, this sound, this guitar tone in his head. And he was going to experiment with guitars and gear and pickups and foot pedals and amplifiers until he could hear out loud the sound that he heard in his head. And I think Icky Thump is an example of how adept he had become at getting weird sounds out of a guitar. I looked online and I tried to find out exactly, what he was playing on that song in terms of equipment and how he made some of those sounds, like that concertina, that wild concertina weirdo sound. I don't know where that came from. I would not be surprised if it was some sort of guitar effect. But yeah, he was and he remains that way, coming up with these weird sounds.
He at the White Stripes, he was one of those guitar players with like Eddie Van Halen back in the day, who would play his solos, with his back to the crowd. I remember, being an aspiring guitar player and a White Stripes super fan, and just wondering, what is that he is playing? And a photo of his pedal board was was coveted. It was currency back in the day. And the one thing about the White Stripes and his setup was it was very primitive. It was, I've got very crappy lo-fi equipment from the 60s. Mm-hmm. I need an MXR micro amp to boost the signal. I got a big muff so I can have a solo, and I've got a Digitech whammy so I can make it an octave high for his solos and an octave low for Seven Nation Army. And then as the desire to create those sounds, like you said, the pedal board got bigger and bigger and bigger. And in reality, that's not something that suited the White Stripes. And the White Stripes was about, how primitive can we be to paint this picture and to tell this story, and as people matured, that wasn't the forum anymore. The White Stripes were not the box that he needed to do. He needed to tell those stories and play those songs.
Right, and now if you go see Jack White live, it's a completely different situation than with the White Stripes. The band that he's got. These guys are great players. His drummer and that kit setup that he has is like, I've never seen anything like that before. He is all about, pushing the envelope now. And I think he got, once he became more adept as a guitar player and as a technician, he just wanted to try something beyond that. Now, again, if we go back to Icky Thump, it is the first time you hear it, this is going to be a White Stripes hit. There's no question about it. I can't remember, what was it? I'm trying to remember what order it came out on the album.
Icky Thump?
Yeah, I believe it was the first
track.
No, the first single.
Yes, it was. Yes.
I think it was the first single. And it was, we, of course, like I said, that they were an essential part of our playlist. It was immediately, when you listen to it, you knew, this is the White Stripes. And at the time, I think I remember wondering how much longer they could keep it up, because like we've said several times over the course of this conversation, is that they had reached the perimeters of the box that they had created for themselves. And there was no point in making the box bigger, because then they wouldn't be the White Stripes. They would be something else. And the only way to do that is, to break up the band, which is what they did. It was a tremendously successful album, especially in Canada. On the Hot 100, the Canadian Hot 100 charts, which is the top 40 charts, it reached all the way into the top 10. I think it was number 9.
Yeah.
Now think about that. The White Stripes as a top 40 band reaching the top 10. That was incredible. It was a rock hit too. Billboard has a whole bunch of different charts. They have the rock charts, the alternative charts, and so on. And on the rock charts, it was top 5. So, and in Canada, I think, I'm just trying to remember how many records it sold. It sold at least 100,000 copies, the album, I mean, sold at least 100,000 copies in Canada because, Jack has Canadian roots if you go back into his family tree. And he also, growing up in Detroit, he had a knowledge of what was going on across the river. And, which explains the Under the Great North, or what was the name of that album? Under the Great White Northern Lights.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do that anywhere else in the world. So it was, it was like, okay, yeah, White Stripes are here, and let's play the hell out of this.
I was revisiting a lot of material from that time, and they have a 1-album deal. It's a major label, it's their debut on a major label. It's on Warner. They've got all this steam behind them. They take over Tower Records in LA, and they call it Icky Thump Records, and they're playing shows there. And I would say it was like at this point they've become that household name. And it's like, oh, that's White Stripes classic over there. And it makes me wonder, and I'm glad it didn't happen, but it makes me wonder what the band would look like. Let's say they didn't break up, they kept going, and then it got to a point, let's say early 2010s, where you go, well, they put out some music, it's okay, but you'll stomach it to go see them live, because they'll play the good songs from their past. It's like, up until nostalgia just absolutely ruined everything about music in our world, where a band would put out a new album as a reason to tour, and you'd be like, okay, well, they'll play 3 songs from that. Metallica will play 3 songs off Death Magnetic, but they're going to end the show with Enter Sandman and all the songs we love. You could kind of tell, you kind of wonder that how much more gas they have in the tank and what's next. But in retrospect, I'm just so happy that they didn't become that watered down product. That they're okay, but 8 years ago they were a lot cooler and they were a lot better.
Jack White was way too ambitious to let that happen to him. Remember, this is a guy that started out with bands like the Upholsterers and Goober and the Peas, and he had designs on being a rock star.
Yeah,
and he wanted to be a big rock star, but he wanted to be a rock star on his own terms. And the more successful the White Stripes became, the more power he had, the more influence he had over his own career and what he wanted to do. So not only I would have loved to have read the contract that he signed with Warner Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Because it would have had all kinds of stipulations regarding creative control, regarding the length of the contract and the obligations to the label and the label's obligations to the band. It must have been a pretty interesting contract. At this time, too, he had already laid the foundations for his entire Third Man empire, and that was starting to really take root. And so that was his backup plan. If the Warner Brothers thing didn't work out, well, he still had a UK deal with XL Recordings, and XL was a partner in Third Man, at least in terms of distribution. Mm-hmm. So they play they do the one last album. Meg goes off and becomes a housewife or whatever it is that she's doing, and Jack was well positioned to move forward with this new personal endeavor and in complete control of his career. And now if you look at Jack, it's like, wow, he can do whatever he wants because he owns his own record label. He owns his own record stores. He owns his own record pressing plant. And he's got powerful management, and he's very, very savvy and well respected throughout the industry. There are worse places to be in life than where Jack White is right now.
He is doing exactly what he wants. He's turning 50 next month, and he's had this amazing punk rock DIY approach to the No Name album, which I would say it's the best music he put out since Blunderbuss. And I just saw him do 2 nights at the Commodore Ballroom here in Vancouver, and it's some of the best concerts I've ever seen. And being a big White Stripes and Jack White fan, I can say I've also seen some shows where he hasn't been very good and hasn't been in the best of moods, but he's in great spirits right now. I've been racking my brain about this as I'm kind of revisiting my fandom and revisiting this band's history. And you're quite the expert on these things, so I will ask you. The White Stripes were around for exactly a decade. You could argue that they have about 5 very good to great albums, and then disappeared. Has there been a band of their success and their, the level of stardom that had that many good albums, and regardless of if they disappeared into thin air or they just got watered down and more boring, is there a band of similar scope that had a good 5 to 6 album run like the White Stripes did?
I can think of 2: The Clash and Talking Heads. Clash came along in 76, early 77, and they were gone by 1985, although we won't even count that last album, which was called Cut the Crap, because Mick Jones wasn't with the group, and it wasn't a very good Clash album. Now, the Clash never really officially broke up. They just stopped playing. Mm-hmm. And they never reformed, and they never did anything ever again. Same thing with Talking Heads. They were together in late 74, and then by 88 were pretty much gone. And again, no formal breakup. They just disappeared.
Yeah.
And there are probably a few others, but those ones stick out in my head.
And it's funny you bring up like the Talking Heads, like never just going off, and they never formally said this is it. They just disappeared. That's kind of what the White Stripes did until 2011, when Jack has that Blunderbuss solo album coming out. Mm-hmm. And he's contextualized it later and just said, like, we need to dissolve the band because if I put out a solo album, you have all these questions, you have all these wonders, you have all this attention at Meg, White Stripes this, and it just kind of takes away from what could be a very earnest attempt at a solo career. So that was the reason why they were dissolved, because up until then, I was hoping that they would just, hey, we're not making music right now. It would have been ideal for me, a fan.
Yeah, well, again, that's Jack. And let's face it, most of those White Stripes albums, although the songs are credited to both of them, they're Jack White solo albums. They really are, featuring Meg White. Where was I going with it? Oh, quiet.
We both have dogs on us or near us right now, which I find quite adorable.
And this one is a Meg White fan, obviously, because every time I say anything negative about her, I get that.
I think that as limited in, like, you can say tradition, in terms of ability to play and music and all that, like compared to her, compared to other drummers, obviously she's limited, but this is somebody that her style, her level of coolness made the White Stripes what they were. And
well, again, we have to look at that. Again, this is all about the aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
The red and white color scheme. When you saw them play live, I mean, the eye contact that the two of them met, the way they were set up, which with only 2 of them, it created an interesting sort of almost dueling dynamic between the 2 of them. There was Jack wailing away on his guitar, and then there was Meg sitting behind her drum kit bashing away. The White Stripes were one of the most visual bands of the 2000s.
Absolutely.
Even their roadies were different. They would wear the black suits with the fedora hats, and you could tell the difference between a White Stripe roadie and a Raconteurs roadie by the color of the feather that they wore in the band of their fedora. If it was a white feather, it was a White Stripes roadie. If it was a yellow feather, well, that was a Raconteurs roadie.
Well, Alan, I just saw a handful of well-dressed roadies at the Commodore Ballroom, and that feather was blue. And
yes, because that's his new color.
Yes. I also learned that The I forget where he said it, but it's the apparel is uniform, but they get to pick their own hat based on their own personality. So that's
Okay.
yeah.
He wasn't the first. He wasn't the first guy to do that. Neil Young and Pearl Jam, and Eddie Vedder, I think, both had their roadies dressed in white lab coats.
I love that.
And I remember seeing Peter Gabriel doing something similar. The last time I think I saw Peter Gabriel, all the roadies were wearing orange jumpsuits. So it's again, music is an oral thing mostly, but it can also be a very visual thing. And when you create, everything about the White Stripes and Jack is so multi-layered. I mean, why Third Man Records? Well, you got to dig into that, and you find out the name, that this is from a movie, and then look at the logo. Where did the logo come from? And it's just a wonderfully textured. This is something that began with the White Stripes, of course, because it started with Meg's love of red and white peppermint candies.
Yep.
And Jack was smart enough to realize that if you're going to have an impact when you play live, one of the ways that you can enhance that is by looking like no one else. Now, with only two of them and a limited budget early in their career, the red and white thing worked fantastically. Yeah. And then Jack just kept coming up with new ideas for everything White Stripes and then everything Jack White.
I couldn't agree more, and visually appealing, and it's something that there's more. You need more. I was just reading an article or an interview he did around this time in 2007 where it's like you need so much more to reach people to tell your story, and you hit the nail on the head. As we wrap up here, I remember I just saw in my general sleuthing of you and the White Stripes in a Google search. You remember I saw somewhere that said you saw them on the Icky Thump tour in Winnipeg.
I think I did. It's such a long time ago, and I've been to so many shows. I remember seeing them at a small arena in Mississauga too. It is the junior hockey arena. It was very weird. I mean,
yeah.
It was very weird because I can't remember too many shows at that particular venue. So I can't remember how many times I saw the White Stripes. It was quite a few, and I saw them in more than one city too.
As we wrap up here, the song this episode is devoted to Icky Thump. If you were to throw it on tonight, what is it? Where does it take you? Where does your brain go? What memory lane do you go down? Like, what's something that kind of sticks with this song? Where does it transport you to?
Oddly enough, I visited the Third Man record store in Nashville. Yeah. And when I walked in there for the very first time, this is the song that was playing. And I thought, okay, well, this is a bit weird. Wouldn't you play something else from your label? But then I thought, well, no, this is Third Man headquarters. They can play whatever they want. And I thought it was very, very appropriate. If you walk into the store, there's in Nashville, there's some display cases with all kinds of cool memorabilia in it. And then you turn to your right, and there's all these different shirts and other pieces of Third Man and White Stripes and Raconteurs and Dead Weather Jack White apparel. And then there are the record racks with all the cool stuff that is on the label. And I just, when I hear that song, I just remember walking into this store in an industrial area of Nashville for the first time and thinking, okay, this is cool.
My family, they've been subjected to my White Stripes fandom since I was in the 10th grade, and I coordinated a trip that we went to Nashville to go to Third Man to see the Canucks play the Predators, and then drove to Memphis so that my dad could finally see Graceland. And when we walked into, I spent a lot of time. I looked at every single thing I could look at in Third Man. And like one of the last things I noticed was in the display case was the guitar that he built in the beginning of It Might Get Loud.
Yeah.
And while I forced a lot of Jack White and the White Stripes on my family, that It Might Get Loud movie was something that really kind of resonated with my old man, and he showed it to other people, and we had that kind of, we had some father-son moments at Graceland, and we had a father-son moment looking at this this Coke bottle on a piece of wood. So I too have fond memories of walking in there.
Now that I think of it, I forgot that movie was screened at the Toronto International Film Festival. And I went to the screening, and Jack and Jimmy Page were there.
Not a bad combo.
No, it was not.
That is one of the best music films, anything about guitar. I love that somebody had the idea to capture that at that point when they were just, in their prime, where Jimmy Page is still, he ain't that old at that point. And just like that whole movie is worth it to see Jack and the Edge look like kids in a candy store when Jimmy Page starts playing the Whole Lot of Love riff. Like that is...
Well, it's brilliant casting too, because you have the Grandmaster in Jimmy Page, you have a mid-period guitar hero in The Edge, and then you have the hot gun, young gun in Jack White. And to have them, all in the same room talking about their obsession with guitars and guitar sounds, and to see Jack hold his own against those two guys.
Yes.
I mean, you leave that movie thinking, this guy's got his stuff together. And we haven't seen the last of him, not by a long shot. There's more to him than the White Stripes.
Yes, I would say that he was the dark horse going into that movie, and he was one of the stars coming out of it. And
absolutely.
I absolutely love that. Alan, I absolutely love talking with you about the White Stripes. I am a podcast subscriber, and what did I listen? I listen every week, and I think you do an amazing job, and you are a integral part of broadcasting in this country. So thank you for everything, and thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it. I'm a big White Stripes fan too, and it's always fun to geek out over a favorite band.
All right, that was Alan Cross. This is Ryan. That was an absolute pleasure. That conversation was great. And next week's episode is really good. This is a conversation I had with a good friend of mine who I'm involved in a creative endeavor with, and I loved it. I'm not going to tell you what song it is. I know what it is. You don't know, and I'm not going to tell you. Thank you very much for telling your friends and rating and reviewing. And if you've bought us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/hardestpodtopod, thank you so much. And don't forget to get out and exercise your right to protest at the next No Kings protest near you. The Hardest Podcast to Podcast is hosted and produced by Ryan Schaap. Artwork by Catlin Likely. Amanda Schultz is our assistant editorial producer. Mike Noble is our Gato.